Hey there, my name is Jessica Bowman. Thank you so much for joining us at Mission Students Online. We gather at 9 a.m. on Sundays. You can learn about all registration pieces and what our experiences will be all about at the link below. Our one hope for you this week is that you grow in your generosity through giving back to God. You know, I have a hunch if you're watching this video, I think you have a desire, whether it be small or a big desire, to be like Christ. And not just to be like Christ, but maybe just to learn more about who he is and who you can be to express his love to others. Well, in that, when we want to be like Christ, that calls us to be different than others and to be generous. And we call this giving back to God. Did you know that all the money we own is from God? God owns it before he gives it to us. And God actually shows us and teaches us how we can save, spend, and share. And so I invite you this week to kind of look at your dollars and your coins and consider sharing in the form of giving back to God so you can bless your community, your church, and above all, God. Now, if you don't have a lot of dollars and dimes in your sharing bucket, you can also be generous through your time. Whether it be your time with God, maybe you spend every day reading a passage out of your Bible, or time through prayer, praying to him at every meal time or before you go to bed. Or maybe it's time blessing a neighbor or a friend or a classmate or a teacher. So consider that. Share your money through your generosity or share your time through being generous. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's teaching and I hope to see you in the garage soon. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
See, we're in the middle of a series titled, Who is Jesus? Where we're exploring what I believe is the most important question anybody can answer, the question of who is Jesus? Because if Jesus is who he said he was, then that changes everything. But if he wasn't, then the reality is following him and believing in him changes nothing. And what's interesting is that's not just a question that we wrestle with in our world today. That's actually a question that Jesus' followers were forced to answer. So what we're gonna do is we're going to listen in on a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples, his closest followers. It takes place in Matthew chapter 16, and in this conversation, we're going to get an answer to the question of who is Jesus. So in Matthew chapter 16, here's what we have. We have Jesus. He has just come to the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asks his disciples this question. He says, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And so they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And then Jesus looks at them and says, "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" And so Simon Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. So who is Jesus? Jesus is the Messiah. Now, what does that mean? Messiah is a Hebrew word that means anointed one, right? What we've got to understand is that in the Old Testament, in the Jewish tradition, whenever they would have a new leader of their nation, a prophet or a priest would anoint them with oil. They would pour oil on them, and that oil would symbolize them being covered and filled by God's Spirit. So Messiah, meaning anointed one, means the person who is filled by God's Spirit. And then you've got Christos, which is the Greek word for Messiah. Jesus Christ isn't actually his last name, that's his title, the Messiah. And some of you literally probably thought that was his last name. You're welcome. It means Messiah because Jesus is the Messiah. He is the anointed one of God, covered and filled by his Spirit. And he came here with a mission. And in Luke chapter 4, verse 18, he tells us a little bit about what that mission is. Here's what he says, and this is him quoting from the prophet of Isaiah, an Old Testament prophet who was delivering a message of hope to the people of Israel while they were ruled by another nation in another day, when they were being oppressed and living in exile. And here was the message that Isaiah the prophet gave to the people of Israel from God, that now Jesus is quoting and declaring that this is the mission he is here to accomplish. In verse 18, Jesus says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. You see, when we understand Jesus as the Messiah, we begin to understand that the Messiah is kind of like the biblical version of the chosen one, right? Like, in all those great movies where there's the chosen one who has this prophecy to fulfill, to put a broken world back together. But Jesus didn't just come to put a fictional world back together. He came to put our world back together because he is the chosen one of God, the Messiah. And what's interesting is that so many of the Jewish people, they had these expectations for who the Messiah would be and what he would do. They believed that the Messiah would be a son of David, the greatest king Israel had ever known, who conquered the enemies of Israel. They were expecting this Messiah to show up and defeat the Romans and free the nation of Israel from their oppression. But Jesus had something so much better planned. You see, Jesus didn't just show up to kick out the Romans. Jesus showed up to rescue humanity from sin and restore us to our rightful place as partners with God. Jesus wasn't just the son of David. He was exactly who Peter said he was. When Peter said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." That is who Jesus is. And what's so beautiful is right after Peter makes that declaration of Jesus' identity as the Messiah, the Son of the living God, the one anointed and filled by God's Spirit, then Jesus looks at Peter and he says, "Hey, you're right." And the conversation continues in Matthew chapter 16, picking up in verse 17, where you've got Jesus. He replies to Simon Peter, and he looks at him and says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." And then what Jesus does next is pretty incredible. He changes Simon's name to Peter. He says, "I tell you that you are Peter." Peter is a word that means rock. And then Jesus says, "And on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Here's what Jesus is doing. He's saying, "Hey, Peter, you're right. I am the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and you're gonna be my rock. And what you've got to understand, Peter, is that I'm going to build my church. I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be loosed in heaven. Whatever you bind in heaven will be loosed on earth." What Jesus is doing is he's saying, "Hey, Peter, I want you to lead a movement that I'm going to start, but I want you to be a part of. And in this movement, what I'm telling you is that nothing will stop it." And what Jesus is doing here is he's connecting the church to the kingdom of heaven. He is saying, hey, they are one in the same, because my mission will be accomplished through my church. The question becomes for us, okay, what is the church? Like, what does that mean? Is that just the building we show up to? And the important thing for us to understand is that the church is not a building or a place. The church is a people. The church is the people of God living out the will of God. It's not an institution, it is a family defined by love, by grace, by forgiveness and redemption. You see, when Jesus showed up in history 2,000 years ago, he didn't go around telling people to sign up to his newsletter. He said, "Hey, I want to invite you into God's family, because it is through a relationship with God that you can experience the forgiveness and redemption that you are desperate for." You have a part to play in this good news message. You have a part to play in God's redemptive plan to rescue humanity from sin and restore creation. So the question becomes, what part do you play? Right? How do I play my part? For those of us who are followers of Christ, I just want to make it really quick and really simple for you. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to follow Jesus. You have to follow Jesus. And I think there are so many times where we settle for, look, like, I like Jesus, I might even love Jesus, I believe in Jesus, I call myself a Christian, but are you actually following him? Because following is more than just saying the right words. Following is doing the things that are asked of you by him. It's actually following the example he set of looking for the things that are wrong and making them right. If you want to be a part of God's plan to redeem humanity, to restore creation, the first step is to follow Jesus. Don't just talk about it, actually be about it. The second thing you've got to do is build the church. Now, the thing about building the church is it's really hard to build it if you're not a part of it. And so for you, maybe you're not connected to a family of believers, to a community of people who say that, yes, Jesus, I want to follow you. Get connected. Stop wasting time, sign up, get involved in a small group, find people that you can do life with. And then to build the church, invite others into this family because it is a family that is available to everyone, everywhere. Building the church doesn't require you to be on staff at a church or a pastor. You can build the church by just telling people that God has changed your life and inviting them to some place where you've experienced that transformation. But Jesus is calling you to look for opportunities where there is darkness and to be a light. Because the church, it's not just a building, it's not a place, it's a people. The people of God living out the will of God here on earth as it is in heaven. You see, with Jesus as the Messiah, what people expected, what they wanted was a conquering king. But what they got was a crucified criminal. They found a suffering servant on a cross. And it's crazy because this Messiah that people were putting their hope in, who they believed was God's chosen one, was literally killed on a cross by the Romans that they were hoping to be freed from. And to what seemed to everybody else like a massive failure was actually God's decisive victory. You see, in the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 21, here's what we read. It tells us that God made him, Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This is the beauty of the cross, in that through the suffering of Jesus, God made a way for all of us to be forgiven of our sins, to be healed from that disease that has infected us for far too long. Through Jesus' death, through the God in human form that is Jesus, his death on a cross, God robbed sin of its power, and he made a way for you to be reunited with him. Please do not miss this, that Jesus, the Messiah, the chosen one of God, has chosen you. The chosen one has chosen you to be a part of his plans, to rescue others from sin and restore creation.